The original 1954 Godzilla wasn't just a monster movie. It was a production so brutal the suit actor nearly passed out on camera. The score was written in a single frantic week, and the sound crew built a roar from a leather glove and a bass. Behind every scene of destruction was a real story of danger, improvisation, and pure exhaustion. Today, we're diving into 20 weird and crazy facts about the classic that birthed a cinematic titan. Fact number 1. The suit actor could barely survive the costume. The Godzilla suit wasn't a costume. It was a torture chamber. Haruo Nakajima, the man inside the monster, could survive only 3 minutes before the heat and lack of oxygen forced him to rip the head off and gasp for air. Temperatures inside skyrocketed to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the suit into a boiling metal drum. After every filming session, the crew drained cups of sweat from the rubber seams, the kind of fluid loss you only see in extreme sports or heat stroke cases. Even seasoned stunt actors refused to get near the thing. And Nakajima didn't just endure it, he lived in it. Day after day, he dragged the 200-pound costume across miniature cities, smashing buildings that cost more than his entire paycheck while trying not to faint on camera. By the end of filming, he'd lost nearly 20 pounds, not through dieting or training, but through sheer survival. Godzilla may have looked unstoppable on screen, but the man inside him was fighting a very real battle just to stay conscious. Fact number 2, the 3 lead actors were all discovered in the same talent contest. Before they were movie stars, the 3 leads of Godzilla, Momoko Kochi, Akira Takarada, and Yu Fujiki, were just kids entering Toho's annual New Face contest. It was essentially Japan's version of a Hollywood talent hunt. Thousands applied, only a handful made it. And shockingly, these 3 future stars all rose from the exact same contest cycle. They didn't arrive through film schools or industry families. They arrived through pure, raw discovery. For Akira Takarada, the timing was surreal. He had barely finished high school when Toho scooped him up, put him in their intensive training program, and then, within a year, handed him one of the biggest roles in what was, at the time, Toho's most expensive film ever attempted. Kochi and Fujiki followed similar paths, thrown straight into a production that was risky, experimental, and technically uncharted. Their careers didn't just begin with Godzilla, they were made by it. Fact number 3. The first suit was so heavy, the actor fell down. The first Godzilla suit was such a disaster that Nakajima could barely stand in it. Constructed from thick latex, metal mesh, and layers of hardened rubber, it felt less like a costume and more like a medieval diving suit. The very first time Nakajima tried to walk in it, he toppled over instantly. The suit didn't bend, it didn't flex, and once he hit the ground, he couldn't get up without a 5-man rescue team lifting him by the shoulders. The suit was so stiff that even basic movements looked impossible. Trying to raise an arm took the strength of a weightlifter. Trying to kneel was unthinkable. The crew realized that unless they wanted their monster lying on his back like a stranded turtle, something had to change. They ended up slicing the entire costume in half and rebuilding it with new joints, creating the version we see in the final film. And even then, calling it movable was generous. It still weighed over 200 pounds and nearly crushed the actor inside. Fact number 4, Godzilla's roar was created with a leather glove and a bass. Forget digital effects or animal recordings. Godzilla's roar came from a leather work glove and a giant bass. Composer Akira Ifukube hated the idea of mixing animal sounds, believing the monster needed a voice unlike anything on Earth. So he coated a glove with resin, pressed it against the strings of a contrabass, and dragged downward with so much force it scraped like metal under pressure. The result was a jagged, otherworldly screech that didn't sound like an animal, a machine, or anything human. But the magic didn't stop there. The sound was slowed down, blasted through echo chambers, and run through layers of reverberation until it rattled theater speakers. Japanese audiences had never heard anything remotely like it. When the roar debuted during test screenings, some viewers physically jumped in their seats. Others covered their ears. One critic even described it as the sound of the earth screaming. And all of it started from one glove and one brutally abused bass. Fact number 5. The composer had only 1 week to write the entire score. Akira Ifukube didn't score Godzilla under ideal conditions. He scored it under a deadline so tight it bordered on impossible. Toho handed him the script, told him he had 1 week to compose an entire feature-length score, and didn't even show him the finished film. He had to imagine the pacing, the tension, and the monster's movement entirely in his head. There were no rough cuts, no test footage, just intuition and hope. The pressure was immense, but Ifukube thrived under it. In 1 marathon week, he created some of the most iconic themes in Japanese cinema. The pounding military march, the mournful tragedy cues, and the low, ominous motif that became Godzilla's unofficial heartbeat. When he finally saw the completed film with his score laid over the destruction, he was shocked by how perfectly everything matched. Audiences assumed he scored it with months of planning and reference footage. In reality, it was one of cinema's greatest last-minute miracles. Fact number 6. The film was directly inspired by a real nuclear incident. Just months before Godzilla entered production, Japan was shaken by a chilling real-world disaster. On March 1st, 1954, the fishing vessel Daigo Fukuryu Maru drifted too close to the U.S. Castle Bravo hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll. The explosion was far larger than predicted, and ash-like radioactive fallout rained down onto the boat. The crew suffered severe radiation poisoning, and one fisherman, Akichi Kuboyama, later died, becoming a national symbol of nuclear fear. The tragedy dominated headlines, reopening wounds from Hiroshima and Nagasaki that were still painfully fresh. The filmmakers couldn't ignore it. Eiji Tsuburaya and Ishiro Honda saw the horror as a warning, a reminder of how human technology had outpaced human responsibility. Godzilla wasn't conceived as a monster from mythology, but as a creature scarred by radiation, a physical embodiment of Japan's fear and anger. When audiences watched Godzilla tear through cities, they weren't just seeing destruction. They were seeing their worst nightmares reflected back at them, the terror of an invisible enemy born from humanity's own hands. Fact number 7. The name Godzilla came from a Toho employee's nickname. For decades, fans believed the name Gojira came from a massive Toho employee nicknamed Gorilla Whale, a combination of the Japanese words Gojira and Kujira. It's the kind of story that feels too bizarre not to be true. But when director Ishiro Honda's widow was asked about it, she laughed off the rumor, insisting the filmmaker spent a long time crafting a name that felt primal, ancient, and unmistakably Japanese. Whether the legend was an inside joke or studio folklore, nobody ever confirmed the identity of the supposed giant staff member. Still, the nickname rumor stuck because it symbolized Toho's creative environment at the time, a place where ideas could come from anywhere, even the lunchroom. What is certain is that Gojira wasn't chosen randomly. The name had to feel like something old enough to crawl out of the ocean and powerful enough to shake the earth. And when audiences first heard it, the impact was immediate. Gojira didn't sound like a movie monster. It sounded like a myth that had always existed, suddenly awakened for the modern age. Fact number 8. Stop motion was rejected because it would take 7 years. Eiji Tsuburaya desperately wanted to shoot Godzilla using stop-motion animation like King Kong. He envisioned meticulously animated destruction sequences, frame-by-frame chaos, and a monster crafted entirely through painstaking miniature work. But Japan in 1954 didn't have an animation team large enough, or experienced enough, to pull off the monumental task. The special effects department did the math and realized that using stop-motion at the scale Tsuburaya imagined would take 7 years to complete. The studio shut the idea down immediately, but Tsuburaya didn't give up. Instead, he pioneered a new hybrid approach, suitmation, combining miniature sets with a full-sized actor to simulate colossal weight and movement. It was a gamble, untested and unrefined, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. What was originally a limitation became the foundation of an entire genre. Suitmation didn't just save the production, it created the signature look of Godzilla, inspiring decades of kaiju films and defining a visual language that still persists today. Fact number 9. The lead actor starred in another film during the same year. Takashi Shimura, who played Dr. Yamane, was already a legend in Japanese cinema, known for his work with Akira Kurosawa. But 1954 was a historic year even by his standards. In the same year he appeared in Godzilla, Shimura also starred as Kanbei, the wise and battle-hardened leader of Kurosawa's masterpiece, Seven Samurai. The contrast between roles was staggering. In one film, he faced the terror of a nuclear-born monster, and in the other, he led a ragtag group of samurai to defend helpless villagers from bandits. His presence elevated Godzilla in a way that most monster films never experience. Shimura brought a quiet dignity to Dr. Yamane, grounding the story in human emotion and scientific curiosity. His somber monologues about the dangers of nuclear testing weren't just lines in a script. They echoed his real-life reputation as an actor capable of carrying enormous emotional weight. The fact that he starred in two of Japan's most influential films in the same year solidified his place as one of the greatest actors of his generation. Fact number 10, it was the most expensive Japanese film ever made. When Toho approved Godzilla, they weren't just making another monster movie. They were making the most expensive Japanese film of all time. With a budget of nearly 63 million yen, roughly $900,000 in 1954, the project was a financial gamble that dwarfed previous productions. The special effects department alone consumed a huge portion of the budget, requiring thousands of miniature buildings, custom pyrotechnics, complex composite shots, and one of the most elaborate creature suits ever attempted. Every yen showed up on screen. The destruction scenes were meticulously crafted with tiny electrical lines, crumbling architecture, and realistic city layouts designed to sell the illusion of mass devastation. Toho poured money into the project because they believed they weren't just making entertainment. They were making a statement, and their risk paid off. Godzilla didn't just recoup its massive budget, it became one of the most influential films in Japanese history, launching a franchise that still thrives today. Fact number 11, 3 Godzilla films almost bankrupted Toho. For decades, fans repeated the legend that Godzilla, Seven Samurai, and Samurai Musashi Miyamoto nearly bankrupted Toho. It's a dramatic, almost mythic version of events. The idea that the studio risked everything to make its greatest masterpieces. But the truth is more nuanced. Yes, these films were expensive. Yes, they pushed Toho's resources to their limits, but there's no solid evidence the studio was ever close to collapse. In fact, Toho was one of the most financially stable studios in Japan at the time, thriving on post-war recovery and a booming entertainment market. So why did the myth catch on? Because the productions felt monumental. Crews were stretched thin across multiple prestige films, budgets ballooned, special effects staff were working impossible hours. And within the studio, it sometimes seemed like Toho was betting the future of Japanese cinema on a handful of ambitious projects. The legend continues today because it captures the spirit of that era, a time when innovation, urgency, and artistic risk defined the studio's greatest achievements. Fact number 12, a radio drama debuted 4 months before the film. Before audiences even saw Godzilla on screen, they heard him on the radio. Toho produced an 11-episode radio drama called Monster Godzilla, based heavily on the film's screenplay. It aired weekly on NHK from July to September of 1954, months before the movie's November premiere. Families gathered around radios to hear a mysterious new monster terrorize Japan, long before they knew what he looked like. In an era before viral marketing, this was one of the earliest examples of a cinematic universe expanding into another medium. The radio drama helped shape public anticipation. Kids debated what the monster might look like. Adults wrote letters demanding more details about the mysterious creature called Gojira. When the film finally premiered, the roar that audiences had only imagined came to life in a way far more terrifying than the radio script could suggest. The drama is now considered a rare piece of Godzilla history, an early attempt at world building that laid the groundwork for the monster's eventual global reach. Fact number 13. The suit actor's identity was kept secret for years. In the early 1950s, Toho guarded its special effects secrets with almost military-level discipline. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka banned journalists from the set, refused to allow photography of the suit, and kept the identity of the man inside Godzilla hidden from the public. Haruo Nakajima's work was so carefully concealed that for years, fans believed Godzilla was an elaborate puppet or a mechanical creation. The mystery became part of the film's aura, a creature that seemed too lifelike to be a man in a suit. It wasn't until the 1960s that Nakajima's identity was finally revealed, turning him into a cult hero among fans. But he had already endured a decade of anonymity, performing grueling, dangerous stunt work without public recognition. When he eventually stepped into the spotlight, fans were shocked to learn just how much physical suffering went into bringing Godzilla to life. In many ways, the secrecy added to the legend. Godzilla wasn't just a character, he was an enigma, a monster whose true form was hidden behind studio walls. Fact number 14. Raymond Burr shot all his scenes in one day. When the American distributors re-edited Godzilla into Godzilla King of the Monsters, they added Raymond Burr as a journalist inserted into the story using body doubles, careful editing, and clever camera framing. Burr's total shooting schedule? A single day. He filmed everything: reactions, monologues, cutaway scenes, in a marathon session that lasted only a few hours. The dubbing process was even faster. Burr completed all his voice work for the film in just 5 hours, a speed that's almost unheard of for an international release. Despite the rushed production, Burr's performance became iconic for American audiences, many of whom didn't realize the film was heavily altered from its Japanese counterpart. His scenes stitched an entirely new narrative into the original film, softening political themes and reframing the story for 1950s American sensibilities. The fact that one of the most recognizable aspects of the US version was created in less than a day is a testament to how resourceful and frantic the import process really was. Fact number 15. The director made a cameo. Director Ishiro Honda didn't just stand behind the camera, he briefly stepped in front of it. In one of the film's most electrifying sequences, when the military activates the massive 300,000-volt power lines intended to halt Godzilla's advance, the man pulling the switch is Honda himself. It's a blink and you'll miss it cameo, but it symbolizes just how hands-on he was during production. Honda was constantly involved in coordinating effect shots, supervising miniature destruction, and shaping the film's emotional tone. Fact number 16. Miniature buildings cost more than the suit actor's salary. Haruo Nakajima became Godzilla through sheer endurance, but the irony was brutal. Many of the miniature buildings he crushed underfoot were worth more than he was paid for the entire film. The special effects team built hundreds of scale model structures with painstaking detail: tiny windows, hand-painted signs, and functioning lights. Each building was crafted to withstand just long enough for Nakajima to smash through it in a single take. If something went wrong, if the suit snagged or he slipped, the crew couldn't simply reset. They had to rebuild the entire miniature from scratch, costing thousands of yen every time. This created an odd tension on set. Nakajima, sweating inside the 200-pound costume, was told to move with maximum power while simultaneously being terrified of stepping in the wrong place. One misstep meant destroying a prop that represented weeks of labor and more money than he'd ever see. As he later said, "I was afraid of the miniatures, not Godzilla." The irony of the monster tiptoeing around miniature cities became one of the film crew's favorite behind-the-scenes contradictions. Fact number 17. The film used 3 separate camera crews. Toho treated Godzilla as if it were 3 films shooting at once. They assembled separate camera teams, one for principal photography, one for special effects, and a third for composite photography. Each unit worked almost independently, following its own shooting schedule, script notes, and daily call sheets. While actors performed dramatic scenes on one soundstage, special effects teams simultaneously staged pyrotechnics on miniature sets miles away. Meanwhile, the composite crew worked on merging live action footage with monster shots to ensure everything blended seamlessly. This division of labor was unheard of in Japan at the time, and it transformed the scale of the production. The coordination required was staggering. Editors received reels of film from 3 different departments that had to be synchronized with the music, sound effects, and visual effects. The result was a movie that felt enormous, as if Japan itself were under attack. The 3-crew strategy later became standard practice in kaiju filmmaking. But Godzilla was the first, and it proved that a monster film could be as complex as any major wartime epic. Fact number 18, effects. Crews spent 71 days creating Godzilla's rampage. When people think of monster movies, they imagine actors, dialogue, and dramatic performances. But on Godzilla, the human scenes were only half the job, and not even the longest half. The principal photography wrapped in 51 days, a fairly typical shooting schedule. But the special effects photography stretched to 71 days, reflecting just how intensive the miniature destruction and composite work truly were. Every single effect shot required perfect timing. Explosions, smoke trails, moving cameras, and Nakajima's body inside the sweltering suit all had to align in one coordinated burst of destruction. Because many effects couldn't be repeated without rebuilding entire sets, the pressure was enormous. Cinematographer Sadamasa Arakawa had to plan each shot like a military operation. Lighting, depth, and perspective all had to match the scenes shot weeks earlier by the main crew. The result was a film where the monster action didn't just supplement the story, it defined it. The extended special effects schedule became a template for future kaiju films and demonstrated just how much artistry goes into making a monster feel real. Fact number 19. The film had a girls' choir from a music school. One of the most haunting sequences in Godzilla features a solemn hymn known as the Prayer for Peace, sung by a massive girls' choir from the Toho Gakuen School of Music. Akira Ifukube composed the piece to reflect Japan's grief, fear, and post-war uncertainty, but the emotional weight of the moment didn't rely on instruments alone. Ifukube believed that a chorus of young voices, innocent, unified, and vulnerable, would best capture the heartbreak of a nation still recovering from real nuclear devastation. Fact number 20. The American version cut 20 minutes and removed anti-nuclear messages. When Godzilla was released in the United States in 1956, the film underwent heavy editing. Approximately 20 minutes of footage were removed, including many scenes that directly commented on nuclear testing and Japan's trauma after World War II. The US distributors wanted a faster, more sensational creature feature, not a somber reflection on atomic devastation. Scenes featuring family suffering, politicians debating responsibility, and scientists warning of humanity's future were trimmed or removed entirely. In their place, new scenes featuring Raymond Burr were added to reframe the narrative for American audiences. The edits softened the film's political messages, focusing instead on Godzilla as an unstoppable natural disaster rather than a nuclear allegory. What remained was still powerful, but the deeper emotional core was largely lost. Modern restorations have helped the world rediscover the original intent, a story born from real fear, real grief, and a real desire to warn humanity about the dangers of its own creations. And that's the hidden truth behind the 1954 Godzilla, a film built on sweat, danger, improvisation, and raw creativity. If you enjoyed uncovering the weird and unbelievable stories behind this classic, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which movie you want us to dig into next. Thanks for watching Iconic TV Rewind, where the monsters behind the scenes are just as fascinating as the ones on screen.